Tonight's talk is on monkeyflowers. And just so you get some idea of how I've separated it out, we're going to talk about monkeyflowers for our chapter region. It's Sacramento County, I reaffirmed, probably has fewer monkeyflowers than any other county in the state. Even Kings County, I thought might be lower down, but it had like 5, and there's 4 or 5 here. But now that this chapter is joined Yolo and Calusa, your chapter has some more of those. So though they're on the periphery, but like I always tell people living in this region that we're actually really close to the Bay Area and the Sierras for everything cultural and exciting. You're ringed by all these great monkeyflowers, and within an hour and a half, you could probably see like 40 species. So that'll come out. And then I'll talk a little bit. So we'll talk about what's in the chapter region, and then in the Sierras. And then I was involved in a couple discoveries of new monkeyflowers, talk a little bit about that. And then it's always kind of the eye candy for the end. There's really cool rare monkeyflowers in California. And 20 years ago, I'd give this talk, a lot of people were seeing these things for the first time, would get really excited. We're kind of now in where you can go to iNaturalist, CalPhotos, CalFlora, just Google, and you can see a lot of these things. So they might not be as exciting to everybody, but they're still really awesome. And sort of tying back to June's sort of wonderful preaching to us, that I think this talk will help establish that love of our native flora that could motivate the hope and action that we all need. So let's see. So if I don't have the slide here, that'll be the first questions. How did I get interested in monkeyflowers? So it was in 1983, probably in early June. I just finished a couple years before my entomology undergraduate at UC Berkeley. Went through the phase of being totally obsessed with all insects, and then kind of focused it down to being obsessed with these really minuscule parasitic wasps that do the heavy lifting on killing herbivorous insects all over the world. And they do their work unseen, and they're incredibly biodiverse, like hundreds of thousands of species of these little tiny wasps. And that's what I thought I was going to work on. But I had gotten accepted into grad school here at UC Davis, and me and my girlfriend at the time, who has since then gone on to become a botany professor at Evergreen State College. And I was totally into insects, and she did her botany thing, I did the insect thing. And we were at Hunter Liggett Military Base in Monterey County, I think, and right off Highway 101 a bit. And there's some great serpentine barrens there. And we were exploring June. 83 was an El Nino rainfall year, and California was ablaze with flowers everywhere. And in a serpentine barren, we found this little plant, the purple mouse ears. And I had met her in an all summer long botany class, and I had been learning how to key out plants, and she had been doing botany for 5 years. And we brought out Munns, the old flora, and just didn't even know where to start on this thing. It kind of stumped us right from the beginning, and especially like the colors inside the corolla. And I was like, I think it's an orchid. And she's like, it's not an orchid. And this is like, well, what is it? Like, I don't know. And we, being with her and her friends, I didn't have any familiarity with the family key, because they'd always say, oh, it's umbel, or it's asteraceae or something like that. And we struggled to get through the family key. And then at some point, it's like, oh my God, it's a Scrophulariaceae. And it does have 5 petals. It's just 3 of them are gone. And then we figured out it's this little thing uh, than Mimulus douglasii. And so that was like, wow, that is such a cool plant. And I don't know why it stuck in my head. And then in a subsequent week, we thought we were going to go backpacking on the John Muir Trail, and it was June in a El Nino rainfall year, and like you couldn't even get past any trailhead in California. And somebody at the ranger station said, "You have to go to Sequoia National Forest, go to Domelands Wilderness," and so that's at the very southern end of the Sierras, where at like 7,000 foot elevation, we did a great backpacking trip. And in addition to the 7 million mosquitoes that were constantly hovering around us, I think I saw like 10 different forms of monkeyflowers and photographed them all. And then when we got to Davis finally in the fall for grad school, I little bit by little bit, I took those photos and tried to figure out what they all were. And then somebody said, "Oh, you should look at Ernest Twisselman's Flora of Kern County." Ernest Twisselman was a rancher in the 40s or 30s, and who late in life got turned on to botany and actually wrote the first Kern County Flora. I got the Kern County Flora, and there were 50 species of monkeyflowers, and it just blew my mind. And I ended up taking a lot of ecology classes at Davis, and the whole idea of like how do plants not all compete with each other? How do they find their niche and everything? And it just seemed like, aren't they doing all the same thing? How do they do that? So it just created this visceral love for these little plants. And but it took me about 7 or 8 years to really say, like, I guess I'm an amateur botanist. And I just like, I'm a photographer, but I want to photograph these things. I'm an entomologist by trade. So that was the beginning. It was just like something I never intended, but pretty quickly became the thing is I want to see every species that's in Munns. And I went all around California and eventually was able to photograph them. Then the Jepson Manual came out, and some that weren't species were species weren't, and some new things came aboard. And I continued to add those to the list, but it's gone from 60 species in the in Munns flora to Naomi Fraga's eFlora, Jepson eFlora is now at about 105. And I just haven't, like, I stopped. I don't know if I'll go see like the 20 that I haven't seen. I'll do it slowly. And at one point I thought I'm going to do a book, but when the inflation of like new stuff to do and realizing that my photos weren't maybe all up to snuff and I needed to re-photograph stuff. And now on Cal Photos, on iNaturalist, all these pictures are out there. Not no aspiration to do a book anymore. So a lot has changed, recently. I guess it's more like 10 or 15 years now in the monkeyflowers. If people have been botanists for a while, we thought of them in the Scrophulariaceae and scrophs, as they're called. In addition to monkeyflowers, anything that was a scroff is kind of in my top tier of things I have a lot of love for and go to see. But so now we have this new family, the Phrymaceae. It came out of genetic DNA analysis and realizing that the scrophs were, they call them garbage cans of uh, different lineages that weren't really understood how they got together, but they just kind of stuck together. But DNA has done a really good job, especially at the family level and stuff, of realizing that no, you aren't related to your brothers and sisters, that they must have a different dad, and the DNA test you took tells you that some of those surprises came in the botany world. They're still coming of what things are actually related to each other and working out these trees. So there's funny family Phrymaceae, and there's one species in the genus Phrymaceae, Phryma leptostacca. Really interesting. It's an East Coast plant, kind of in the understory plant, East Coast of the United States and in China. And as best people can tell right now, it is the same species. It probably, fairly recently, thousands of years, got transported across. There's no deep lineage for these things. So there's not a lot of plants quite like that. But there's 13 genera now in this family, Primaceae, and 5 genera in North America, 4 in California that we'll talk about. Whoop. Oh my gosh, the battery's running low, so Carol will plug this thing in. Oh. Whoop. So here's the worldwide distribution. So for these 200 species, most of them are in the Americas, but there are some in southern part of Africa, Madagascar, in eastern Australia. Well, and this is, yes, and should be looking in here. And then China and in Asia, there's a number of species. The genus Mimulus, within anybody older than 30 or something, totally knows these plants as Mimulus. And that has 8 species, 2 on the East Coast, and then 6 scattered around Asia. So, but the main distribution in Western North America, including Mexico, probably has about 160 of the 200. And then to focus more on the center of diversity is really California, with half of the species do occur in California. And this is kind of an old slide, but the density by county of monkeyflowers or these are kind of regions, ecoregions. The Sierras from, say, Yosemite southward probably has 50 plus species. So we're really close to the center of diversity. It's sad that it trails off right in your backyard. And in California, they're literally found from right where the ocean spray goes up onto the cliffs. There's a species of erythranthe that occurs right there, and then up at timberline or in alpine areas, you can find Erythranthe sextorphii. And then there's one area I found right next to, within Yosemite National Park, where there's 9 species and about 1/4 of an acre, which is pretty high density. And you can kind of get that, I think, from buckwheats out in the desert. And I'm not a big aquatics person, but you can probably find 700 species of carex in the same type of area. But as far as I think it's way up there, and that there's just so much diversity. And Naomi Fraga, who's a California expert in monkeyflowers, we totally agreed one day that there's a fundamental rule that you rarely find just one monkeyflower. Like if you find one, you usually find 5 in a given place. So when they find their area, whatever it is, there's usually a bunch of them there. And my interest was kind of this just enthusiasm for cool plants, which I think a lot of us share, and loving to go out there. But then as my career kind of shifted more into both trying to be more scientific about the variation I was seeing, and then working in conservation and biogeographic information, the CNDDB, all that stuff. It was really, that was sort of my focus. That's what I thought most monkeyflower people did. But about 20 years ago, what's the date on this paper? Yeah, 2008, a John Willis professor at Duke University felt like there needed to be a model organism or a model system, a one species or a group of species that everybody trying to do research on evolution and genetics in plants should work on the same thing, just like we do with the white rat and the fruit fly in animal genetics and medicine and all that sort of stuff. And there is another well-established model organism, which is this little mustard next to the rats, and that's a Arabidopsis. And that probably has like 40,000 papers written that used it involved in the study. And what happens is when so many studies have been done, every system of that plant, every gene is so well understood that if you want to look at salt tolerance or um, cold tolerance or something like that, you just have this incredible scaffolding. And so Mimulus, he decided it has a very quick turnover time of a couple of weeks, and decided that it was a perfect North American species that could be the next model organism. Not and then from that point on, not really realizing that there's a ton of species and there's an amazing amount of variability, and it sort of clouded the whole thing. But it hasn't stopped this enterprise. It's gaining speed. And Dina Grossenbacher uh, helped me get this printout of the number of papers that when she just searched for Mimulus guttatus, and it's probably gotten up to like 50 or 60 per year. And there's literally now probably 50 to 100 professors who have some sort of Mimulus research going on, and a couple hundred um, grad students. And it's maybe my last slide on this, but it's just kind of a sad thing to me is they're so focused on the basic science of genetics and evolution, and they're so confused about what species are, like our morphological concepts and populations and that sort of thing. And they've been very careless about grabbing Mimulus guttatus without realizing possibly that it's not cutaneous, it's another species, a close related plant. And then furthermore, they totally freaked out when the paper by Naomi Frog, all these authors on the lower paper here wrote the paper that said we need to break up the genus into multiple genera for a variety of very valid taxonomic reasons. But all these researchers who are interested in just basic biology of genetics said, no, you can't change our name. Mimulus is our name. And I was at one meeting where a very angry and threatened researcher got up and he said, to talking to the taxonomist or the morphological taxonomist, saying, you don't understand, you're just completely destroying our brand. And we depend on this for funding and everything like that. So but they, as it stands right now, there's been pretty much total acceptance among field botanists, agencies, academic, conservation botanists to use these new names. And oh God. There we go. And so the names, if you're younger, this is pretty much all you've known, but are the Diplodocus, Erythranthe, are the two main groups now that monkeyflowers exist in California. There is still one Mimulus in California. It's basically a weed that is one of the eastern species, Mimulus ringens, that somebody planted next to the Stanislaus River as an ornamental plant. And I'm totally out of touch with what's going on there, but it was spreading down the banks and the adjacent areas to the river. So at one point, when I was in charge of the state's noxious weed program, I just thought, like, well, that would be very ironic to target that for eradication, but it doesn't seem to be. It's like a waif, if you know it. That just it's there. It's not dying immediately. And then we have this other one species. I'll show a picture of it. It occurs within the chapter boundaries, and it is not Erythranthe or Diplodocus or Mimulus. It's Mimutanthe, and it just has these characters that the calyx is not a fused tube nearly to the end, but that it actually splits about halfway through it. It's very fuzzy and it's a cool little plant. But so we have these two groups, Erythranthe and Diplodocus, and I teach a whole Jepson workshop on how to identify monkeyflowers of the Sierra and everything like that. And it takes a long time to get people confident in how to tell an Erythranthe from a Diplodocus, but this is the only part of that class I'll transfer, is that an Erythranthe, the flower, the corolla, the colorful part sits in the calyx. And in erythranthe, that will always be on a pedicel that attaches to the stem. And okay, so this has a oh. Well, unfortunately, I'm colorblind. So here's the pedestal. Here's the pedestal right there. Oh, I put this little here on the end. So if you want to know, it's an erythranthe, and a diplocatus just sits right on the stem there. So you don't need to take the Jepson workshop. Got that down. And now I lost that. Oh, it just switched. I'm just going to try something. Holy cow. And so just to get us out of this introductory part that I've spent too much time on, I'm going to get rid of this for you. Well, if it, there you go. Okay. Just a little bit more to say that what are monkey flowers beyond being a model organism for geneticists and a fetish plant for certain crazy botanists, and there humans have found a lot of other some other uses for monkey flowers in horticulture. There's been, I'm not a purist, there's been a lot of cool breeding of totally gaudy and completely unnatural. But this one below is the jelly bean fiesta marigold. And I was at Huntington Gardens and they had like 400 of these things planted everywhere. And it was just amazing. And I grew a couple in my yard, but I'm going to go big next year on them. And somebody wrote a book called Mystery of the Monkey Flower. And there's these things called the Bach flower remedies. And like way back when, if you Googled Mimulus, like you'd get half of your things would be the Bach flower memories. And Bach was some guy who went out in meadows and meditated, and the harmonies of the universe would tell him what kinds of plants would cure what kinds of ailments. And Mimulus, this, you could probably get it at the Sacramento Natural Food Co-op, I pretty much guarantee you. And it cures like nervousness and anxiety. So I was like downing cups of it before I came here. But oh, so after that thing popped up, I could just hit any of the keys that was working again. But now I've lost that little thing. Yeah, you know how to bring that thing back. I just love. Oh, there it is. No, I missed it. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, and then about 5 months ago, preparing for a talk, I was just like trolling to see like what monkey flower things are out there, and I think it was in like March that I found this, and it's like, oh my god, I missed this concert. But there's a local band I think called Monkeyflower, and they have a CD, and I have no idea what their music's like, but it must be awesome. So let's get into probably what you all came for is to see pictures of cool monkey flowers. And I'll start off with focusing on plants of the local chapter boundaries. And it starts out in Sacramento. And so this is a sticky monkey flower, diplocatus. So it's a diplocatus. It has no pedicel. The calyx is just sitting on the stem there, and some tends to grow on rocky hillsides. It hates clay. I can tell you that, living in Davis with, I view these as annual plants. And sometimes when it does occur, it can be really amazing and profuse. And if you take the Amtrak down to the Bay Area, when you go through Martinez and the Carquinez Strait, sometimes it's like whole hillsides are just covered with this. And this is probably the first monkey flower I actually saw in my life when I was in kindergarten, and we went to the California Botanic Garden. I grew up in Claremont, and for a field trip, and they were breeding monkey flowers there to improve them. and the person told us the thing that the stigma is like the little tiny looks like the lips of the monkey's face. And if you've never seen this trick before, and plants do have behavior, if you touch that thing right before your very eyes, like a Venus flytrap, it'll close. But so there are people are this is probably one of the more familiar plants to gardeners, to um, people that like to go hiking. And it definitely occurs in eastern Sacramento County. This may be uh, one of the more prevalent monkey flowers in the county, and still somewhat prevalent thanks to Carol's work. It's a vernal pool plant, and it's very showy when its time comes in the phenological succession of the vernal pool. Sometimes there can be hundreds of them. And I'm sure probably a lot of you guys have seen these when you've been out to Mather, the vernal pools out there, or anywhere else around here. So that's another solid Sacramento. This plant hasn't, I guess, been collected in Sacramento County. It didn't show up in the uh, consortium, but it is here. This is photographed just on Meadowview Road, just south. I worked for a CDFA laboratory there, and at one point they were building a new building there, and they took some kind of vernally wetland areas, totally soggy. Every other year somebody would try to drive a truck out there and that it stuck up to the axles. And they put the building in, and then they graded this big area to lay down sod. But then it started raining, and they kind of put it uh, on delay to do that. And all these cool plants came up, and this Erythranthe latidens came up on that area. And I had seen it out in Yolo County before, but and Solano County, but in Carol would know too, but it hasn't been vouchered apparently here. So that's I think the third species. And it's Carol was familiar with it, but I've talked to a lot of people who even got their master's degrees studying vernal pools. I don't know if I asked Christy at some point, but most people are like, I've never heard of it. And it's a very significant, I think it's very beautiful, but it's probably one of the least showy monkey flowers. So there's a whole group of these plants further north that are associated with vernal wetlands that are just not very showy and insignificant. And then the other plant that if you're a hiker, if you're a casual botanist, maybe you've tried to grow these in your garden, but this is what would fall under that category, Mimulus gutata of old, or now Erythranthe gutata. And I'll just say that it's a very difficult group because for the most part, the flowers all sort of look alike. And then there's a ton of variability in it all over the place. So it takes very systematic study of the morphology and the substrates. And sometimes people actually do see if they will interbreed, and starting to look at the molecular work. But with all this firepower that exists and all these experts, nobody sat down to try to say, okay, what are the real species? And it's waiting for a grad student or a career researcher to really try to say what are the discrete populations and why is that important. I think if you like science and you just kind of want to know if you're a categorizer or if you're obsessive compulsive or whatever, you just want to be able to put names on things. But it also, looking at Nick and June, there's like conservation implications that if you can really say this thing's very distinct, we know that it's special, it only occurs in this one place, it's preserving something that exists. There's kind of like ethical and high-minded reasons for it, but there's also sort of the whole practical thing, like the next cure for cancer is going to come from this one monkey flower that if you don't know it's special, you're going to wipe it out. So how did I do, Nick? So this group's just, I've given like a number of talks just on this group, kind of aimed at like working botanists who get paid to go out and put names on plants. And I think this really makes them feel uncomfortable because it's kind of a hard, messy group, and they're just not sure if they really need to know all these new names that popped up in the eFlora. And this is just one tiny part of like my whole half-hour talk. But one good thing is that of the 22 species that are all related to Erythranthe guttata, most of them have some morphological distinction, and they are very isolated in a very special part. So if you're trying to key out something, especially with this picture and some other guys I have, you could say, okay, I'm pretty sure it's not any of these things. And then you've got it down to just about four things. And the two most common are Erythranthe guttata and Erythranthe microphylla. So that's not the flowers aren't small. Whoever described it thought the leaves were small, but they just had a puny specimen or something. But the main thing about that is guttata now is perennial. It has to have a perennial water source. It lives for more than 1 year, and microphylla is an annual that comes up every year. And so probably you're seeing a lot more microphylla when you're out hiking than guttata. But I think there's just still a tendency, and even of really good botanists, to just say, I don't have time for that, or I just don't know, and they just put down guttata. But it can be really beautiful. It's one of the more common ones. I had a lot of boredom about it in my early days of Monkeyflowers, but now I really appreciate it. When you hit it in a good display, it can be really amazing. And I do really like the color yellow. So here in this area, in addition to guttata and microphylla, I think it's very likely that there is these two other species called Nasuda and maybe Arvensis. I don't really know Arvensis that well, but both of them are, they don't outcross, they're sulfurs, and the flowers have become, the corolla tube is super narrow. Pollinators can't really get in there. So they're effectively cleistogamous. They don't need reproduction to reproduce. So I think these could possibly be here too. And so those are the ones that I was able to confirm through collection records and photography records, and iNaturalist are in California. And so now we're going to look at things that are when we pick up Yolo County and Colusa County, which are nominally part of this Colusa part of this chapter. But a lot of these things only pick up when you get out of the valley and just into the foothills. So really this whole valley area around here, and it's not just because we converted it to agriculture and homes and everything. I just think it was like a giant, swamp half the year, flooded intensely, and there's just only a few species that were really made to be in those sort of habitats. So, whoops. So this is the one I showed you that I first got interested in, purple mouse ears, and it actually is part of a group that are all some of the really cute plants. And what's interesting about this too is that is not a flower sitting on a pedestal or a stem. That is part of the flower tube that is going all the way down to the calyx. And with plants like this, people are always like saying, "No, there must be some kind of moth that has a tongue that's 3 inches long," because I read about that in the tropics. There was some moth, but I think more it's like that. It's like putting a sign up on a stick, like when you're going down I-5 and you want to find a Taco Bell. You can see it from 2 miles away that the Taco Bell sign is up on the stick, and that's, I guess, for pollinators can see this thing, but it makes them pretty darn cute. And so both Diplicus bolanderi and Diplicus lanei grow in very dry, gravelly areas. They're really sticky, gooey plants, and they're at the fringes of Colusa County and a tiny bit in northern Yolo County. And then we pick up lanei to the east of us as well. But and then here is this thing, Mimulus pilosa. So it's sort of the oddball monkey flower in that it's by itself in its own genus. And it is really widespread in any sort of hot, dry part of it. Starts in Oregon and goes all through California down into Baja and a bit into Nevada, Arizona. So it's very widespread. It blooms late in the season in gravel beds. But what's really amazing about it is I've seen it in like 20 different places. I've looked at 100 photos of it. It has no variation. It just looks exactly like this. And it's just interesting when it doesn't have any close relatives, but it's, I don't know how long it's been around for, but it just doesn't seem to be changing, speciating. It's successful and it's very widespread. So, and we barely get Erythranthe cardinalis. So unlike most monkeyflowers, which are pollinated primarily by small solitary bees or some small flies, this is hummingbird pollinated, obviously. And it has a few different relatives around the Western US and is kind of a late bloomer, pretty cool. And it likes to grow and really sort of have its feet in wet areas. It's in shaded oak woodlands where there's a stream or something like that. And this just barely occurs in Yolo County. So a lot of these plants, like when you get into Napa County proper, then like Napa County probably has about 40 monkey flower species or 30. So, um, and then Floribunda again in the when you start getting into rocky areas with oak forest and that sort of thing, it's really a foothills, Sierra foothills up in the North Coast and everything. And it's one of a couple of this super um, slimy plants. If nothing else, you can sort of identify it by its sliminess. It's you have to tell it apart. I'll show a picture later of Moschatus, but it's a kind of nondescript plant. Again, it's like most botanists go through their lives not really like they probably see it at some point and go, huh, I wonder what that is. And so now we're getting in, we're going to kind of look at the Sierra as if you went up Highway 80 or Highway 50. And both, not so much on Highway 50, but on Highway 80, when you get past Auburn, you'll start picking this up instead of the sticky monkey flower that I started the species accounts with. And it's a really showy plant. And if you ever take Highway 49 from Nevada City to Downeyville in May or June in a good year, it's just like, and then one common name is the azalea monkey flower, and they really look like azalea plants with just thousands of blooms, and they really like road cuts. So it's if you're on the highway, it's a good plant to see. And then um, this is a plant that you see in the Sierra when you get above probably about 6,000 foot elevation. And if you go to Yosemite in the summer or up Highway 80, and a lot of people here would probably think like, oh, I know that plant, but I thought it was called a Lewisii after Lewis and Clark. My internet connection is unstable, hopefully not too long. And so in Brian East, I'm a botanist who did the treatment of monkey flowers for the flora North America and has injected a lot of new species, pulled old names up and everything. He took that researcher who did one of the first genetic analysis, Paul Beardsley, on monkey flowers, recognized that the Lewisii plants he collected from the Southern Sierra were showing up not along with the ones that he was getting from Oregon and Washington. And lo and behold, it is valid. Here's what true Lewisii looks like, a slightly different looking plant. And on this map, um, this is where arabescens occurs. So basically anywhere around here, these dots down here is a different species. And then Lewisii begins kind of more in the Cascade areas and Trinity, Modoc, and up into Oregon. And just one more picture of them so you can see them close together is Lewisii is kind of more like sort of refined and dainty, and arabescens is kind of this sort of scraggly hairy thing, but it has squared off petals too. So that's one it's a plant that a lot of you probably know, but the name change is actually kind of exciting because it's a new species that we weren't aware was sitting there. And then this is a super common plant if you're hiking in the Sierras. It's not and it's not Mimulus guttatus. Uh, sorry, it's not Erythranthe guttatus uh, because the flowers are really wide mouthed and open, but it's generally in very dry areas. And sometimes it can just be in absolute open sunbank baked areas. And so it's kind of cool. It's very widespread. And it's called the musk monkey flower. And there's just a total, what's that word, apocryphal or a myth about it that it once had this musky smell. And then depending on variations of the myth is like it got imported into Europe in the early 1800s. And then at some point it just lost that smell. And then some of the variations are it happened here too, like all at the same time. And that's just got to be nonsense. And that would be like a literary thing to try to trace, like, where did that come from? And like we know nowadays, um, fake news, bad information persists rampantly. So, but it doesn't have anything. And this is a really cute plant. It's related to the Kelloggii and Douglasii that I showed you. And it's not super common in the Sierras around here, but there's a couple of really good spots up by when you're just coming into Grass Valley on Highway 20. There's an area called Hellsaf Acres. Some of you might have been there. Really great botany spot, although a lot of it's private, and PG&E and some other folks are turning it into buildings. But just another one of these ones that it's sitting on a flower stem that's just going down to the ground, but there's no nectar at the bottom. It's bee pollinated up here at the top. But super cute plant. If somebody could figure out how to stabilize these things and turn them into bedding plants, I'm sure Ace Lumber would have them out in their pony packs and stuff like that. But they're kind of too fleeting. And so a pretty common plant when you get to higher elevations, you're hiking around, say, Donner Lake or Castle Peak or Tahoe, you'll see this guy, and this is called the skunky monkey flower, and it has a smell. It sort of smells like skunks or also like plant material that you get in a baggie at the dispensary. It's a really strong smell. And Mephiticus is derived from name for skunk in Latin. So, and it occurs, so there's a whole group of monkey flowers that occur in pink and yellow. And some populations are all yellow, some populations are all pink, some of them can be together. And then this guy is a little tiny relative of Mephiticus. You can see this along Highway 80 and a bunch of different places, Grouse Ridge, hiking around Castle Peak and around places like Tahoe. It's just cute. Named after Willis Jepson. He got a monkey flower named after him. And then another relative uh, of those guys in the Diplicus, and I think these were photographed at Carson Pass. These occur a lot in the High Sierra, but they're really small, and it's one common name is a least flowered monkey flower. And so it's obscure. Some are really showy, and some are kind of tiny and obscure. And here's all three of those together, just to revel in their cuteness. And then a relative of those that's also very common in the Sierras. And it's another one that from kind of up in Butte County all the way down to Tulare County, it doesn't have any variability. It just looks exactly the same, and it doesn't have any close relatives. It's kind of a little bit off on its own. But just another one of these diplicus that occurs in scree, dry areas, and has those two yellow guides. This is a plant of the foothills, and it's an erythranthe, and it's really cute and can can carpet these lava formations or Tuscan flows. A lot of ridges when you go up in the Sierras are old flows that came down rivers, and then now they're ridges. And it can just carpet. It's called bicolor, but actually a number of populations are all yellow. And those are often misidentified as other things when people don't realize that. And here was just one plant that I found that's really tricolor. And that stuff happens too. I have a whole folder of weird mutant monkey flowers. And when people, for 30 years have known that I'm into monkey flowers and everything. So that's what people like to send me is albinos. Like I have about 10 different species that are all white and just ones that have these crazy outbreaks of color, but they're not, they're just individuals within a population and they just get reeled back in. And again, in this Erythranthe guttata, messy big group, this is something that's actually pretty distinct. And you know it when you're seeing it because it's at high elevation, Tillingii. And it's usually growing often where areas are wet because the snow's melting. And it's just one of those super cheerful patches of yellow that you can see when you're out hiking. And then Breweri, very small, kind of obscure, but very numerous in both the Sierra upper foothills and in the Coast Range. And if you go into California and do a map, it's just like all over the place. But again, it's like I don't think there'd be many casual botanists who would say like, oh, I saw the most beautiful patch. Sometimes there's like millions of them growing in the scree, but they're not big showy plants. Cool. And Primuloides doesn't have a lot of close relatives. There's two versions of it, but this is a plant that's sticking its flower way up, trying to presumably, I'll just say, trying to advertise it or get it noticeable to pollinators, but it is sitting on a pedestal because it is an erythranthe. Those other things were diplicus, and that's just a really long stem making those sit up. And it's often anytime you see corn lilies, if you know in your meadows in the Sierra, and corn lilies are these big stocky plants, and there will almost always be primuloides. And it's not a bad, like sometimes you give a species name to a plant in one genus because you think it kind of looks like something in another genus. And the genus primuli are the primroses. And I guess that kind of looks like a primrose flower. It's one of those that gets that name that way. And so that's not all of the ones that you could see on a really good field trip, day trip out of Sacramento up Highway 80 or 50, but those are probably the most common ones. And I'm going to try to get through this kind of fast, but it was exciting to me. And I just got asked to give a talk to the Placer chapter, and their president really wanted me to focus on my discoveries in Monkeyflowers. And at first I was like, what? I don't want to do that. But it's an amazing story. And it allowed me to, when I discovered this Monkeyflower, it came fame and fortune. I was able to retire early and make all the talk shows and everything like that. So it was kind of an amazing event. And that's a joke, right? I had to say that. My wife said, you got to tell them that that's a joke. So this is the plant that I didn't discover it, but I, along with many other people, thought that's a really beautiful plant. And some people had collected it, but after they collected it, well, here's to show you where I first saw it. Okay, this is my personal story. For many, ongoing it's been about 30 years going to a strawberry music festival that in its beginning was in a Mather area adjacent to Yosemite National Park. San Francisco owns this summer camp up there. And the first year we went in 1991, me and my wife went the week before we got married and decided, hey, let's go to a music festival because we don't have anything going on. And and I went hiking around in this area right here, and I saw that beautiful monkey flower, and I was like, wow, that's really amazing. And then for our honeymoon, we hiked along this trail in Hetch Hetchy, and I saw it all over the place there. And so I was really motivated. I'm going to find out what that is. And both looking at the few pictures, this is back when there weren't digital pictures, but there were books and stuff like that. And then I got the name Laney was what it looked like people thought it was. And I went to the Jepson Herbarium in Cal Academy, and I looked at Laney, and there was my plant that I really thought was cool, but there were all these other plants that didn't quite look like it that were also called Laney. And actually, this is true Diplicus laney at that same site. And in a good El Nino year, it will carpet the open granite scree. And it's got similar stripiness to it. And it looks kind of similar, but it's not as cool and ornate. I will flip back again to compare that more drab looking thing to this thing. And then this thing almost exclusively grows in granite cracks. And sometimes these granite cracks are 12, they're like sort of open cracks with maybe a little bit of soil. And it'll just form like, and it looks like somebody bought, pony packs of pansies and planted them in there. It's just super dramatic. And it has a really strong skunky smell. Laney doesn't as much. Um, Here's another example of if you look at the bottom of the corolla, they're very different. So, I was, well, I'm not a botanist. I'm not really sure, but more and more I was like convinced this has got to be something different. And um, I got a lot of pushback from a number of people initially saying, oh, I don't know. I think it's just maybe something about growing in the crack is changing it or stuff like that. And uh, try to get the story short. I never was able to get a colleague to test the DNA on this. And this whole group of purple monkey flowers that grow in dry, scree, sandy areas hasn't gotten a thorough analysis of DNA yet. But there were so many different morphological features on it, and I was still like sitting on the fence and just a little bit unsure how to write a species description. And then Guy Neeson, the Texas botanist, was finalizing the treatment for the flora of North America, which may not get revised for, like 80 years or something. And he said, you've got 3 weeks to get this thing published, but he runs his own online journal and he's a prodigious taxonomist. He says, I'll help you. And so he kind of schooled me through writing it. So that is one of two monkey flowers that I did, other people had discovered it and collected it, but they misidentified it. A few of them kind of thought something weird was going on, but they just didn't have time to pursue it. And for some reason, there was one expert that came and went during my time, an academic expert, David Thompson. He wrote the treatment, the first manual. He just kind of like brushed it off and said, oh, I just think it's variation or something. So, but since I wrote that paper and just this new phenomenon now of iNaturalist and the amazing way that it's pulling what I think of as amateurs, but is taking people and slowly converting them to being more aware and better botanists for local areas than most people who are professional botanists who are busy working and don't have as much free time to go do stuff. But there's a bunch of young botanists out of Fresno who saw my paper get published and have gone out on trips to find it in new places. And so they've really like filled in the fact, and it stays true to form in all these places. And it also I didn't know Aaron Sims from the CMPS when I published the paper. He said you didn't put a recommendation for rarity and doesn't need protection. I said I don't really know how widely it's distributed. And but these guys have really filled it in, and I think it isn't a plant that needs a conservation status, but it is very focused in this area. So the second one uh, is something that I was at a Northern California botany meeting up in Chico. There was an open house at the herbarium. I went in, Lawrence Janeway, the curator there. I went in and he had taken a bunch of specimens in the collection and put them in glassine envelopes or plastic envelopes. And so he could display them and people weren't going to screw them up. And there was a really big individual of this thing. And it was just crazy. It had all these dissected weird leaves and it was being called Laciniatus, which Lily, is it? Yeah, she got her PhD studying this plant, Laciniatus, I just learned. And it's a plant that really is most common in the Sierra foothills, not like pretty much in the same area where the graniticula that I worked on. So there's this thing called the cutleaf monkey flower down there. And so when people saw something sort of similar up in Chico, they just thought, oh, it's a disjunct population of the same old, completely non-diagnostic flower of that group. But so here's here's the distribution of Laciniatus, the cutleaf monkey flower. And then when you get, so here's that distribution here. And then there's just these plants way up there. That's, I think, like 125 miles. And both looking at that specimen, going looking into the field, I was like, okay, I think this is not that thing. And then I had known Jay Sexton, a professor at UC Merced, who got his PhD thesis working on Laciniatus. And he goes, yeah, I think you're right. I've been noticing the same thing. So we went up there together and then we're like, no, this thing's really different. And then a third, another grad student got involved in the project and she was really interested in just why would these plants like form these sort of skeletonized leaves. But she did a DNA analysis on this one and found out that these things are not closely related to each other. They're more related to things that have normal leaves. And then they independently got this new growth form. And I think her sort of theory is they grow in exposed open granite where they're feeder in water, but at some point the water starts kind of drying up and they're just at high desiccation threat by having all that leaf material. So that's her hypothesis on why. But so this is when you hear about convergent evolution, where they got so close together that most botanists thought they were the same thing. So we all three of us did the write up on that, and here I just looked at that in iNaturalist, and people are still kind of it's about the same level. It is a 1B plant, I believe, and so that's something I never thought I would do when I just got interested in like, hey, I'm a botanical photographer. I just like to go look at them and take pictures of them, but I did kind of get sucked into that. And now I'll try to finish up with just, I mean, there's probably like 27 of these that are like unique. They're really cool. I could tell you a story about them. It would be 10 o'clock. Three people would be left. So I'll try to go through these kind of quick, but this is just cool. Some of these are kind of cool looking and stuff, but they're also cool. This thing just has such a tiny limited distribution right near Big Bear Lake in San Bernardino County, and it's called the eye strain monkey flower, and it's highly threatened. It's on a lot of private property. People want to build cabins and do other stuff up there, and I think there's some of it has been locked up in conservation acreage, but it's just one of many rare plants out there that they're just really cool. And then it's really neat. The disjunct population of this was found in Baja California in the San Pedro Martir. There's some highlands down there, so that's just adds to its coolness. And But so the eye strain monkey flower, I just thought this is sort of a cool thing. It's like, well, it's a pretty tiny monkey flower, but I thought you might be interested in, well, what is the smallest monkey flower? And of course, any small monkey flower requires that you take a coin out of your pocket when you photograph it. So these are five of the, I think the major contenders are what's the smallest monkey flower. And sometimes monkey flowers are very adaptive to whether they got a lot of water or not much water. They're plastic in their growth form. So sometimes maybe it's cheating a little bit that some monkey flower just wasn't raised with very much water and it didn't grow very big. But these are all pretty tiny guys. This is the least flowered monkey flower and pygmaeus. So they're getting recognized for being small. And so I don't know which one is truly the smallest, but today I just was wanted to do this. I tried to figure out how much do they actually weigh, and I got all the notes for that. But I did a little bit of ballpark, but I think you have to take like 400 of them to get a gram. And then I just did the math and I found, I thought, well, I want to compare that to the general Sherman tree. And it would sort of be like comparing a mite to a whale or something like that, but just the two ends of the spectrum. And because they're angios, well, they're not angiosperms, but they're vascular plants, and they have common ancestor, and they all have xylem and phloem and kind of work the same way. And they did have, I think the general Sherman tree is 2 million tons, or 2 million pounds, I think was the estimate. So it's a trillion times heavier than one of these plants here. And I thought that was really kind of a amazing thing when I look at these tiny little plants. So here is another very beautiful, uh, the Hetch Hetchy monkey flower. Again, this is just that area where I found the graniticula, but this is a very restricted endemic, although it's not uncommon when you're in that area. And it kind of thrives on disturbance after fire and stuff. Sometimes it's triggered. They did a grading project of some bare dirt that didn't have a lot of them, and there were tons of them. But it is a rare plant, rank 1B, and super beautiful. And it doesn't really have super close relatives. So again, here's just things I think about late at night when I can't sleep. But it's like, what has this plant been doing for the past 200,000 years while we've been going, or 2 million years, going through all these ice ages? And its habitat during the height of the ice age probably wasn't right there. It was probably something 20 miles away, and was it tons more of it? And so there's never answers to those questions because annual plants don't fossilize generally. But it's a really pretty one that you can see if you go up there. So another plant, and I'll just show you where it occurs. See, what is the best town? If there's not a lot of towns around there. Well, kind of north of Fresno in the foothills, but it's much smaller. Okay, go away. Yeah, south of Oakhurst, but it's in a pretty focused area. It's smaller than this polygon, and it's very unique. It's no other monkey flower has the corolla petals that look like this, where the top ones are diminished, and it's related to a bunch of other monkey flowers that kind of have the similar pattern. So it does have sort of close relatives. It was the group of about 12 species that Naomi Fraga studied for her PhD. But it's just this cool little beautiful plant growing in granitic scree in a pretty dry foothill area. But while I was pondering, the uniqueness of this corolla, I just thought it'd be neat to sort of just take the time to look at all the different forms that a monkey flower corolla can take. And, sometimes, like on this one, we'll see in a second, that's one lobe. And then these are four lobes at the top. They all have five lobes in theory. This guy is only showing two. In the Gutata group, they kind of have this sort of landing pattern and kind of a closed mouth. We'll see this one in a second. It's just completely weird. And then here on the Primuloides, a number of them have little notches in the petals. So a lot of variability. So it's Calochortus is like an amazing genus. That could have been my fetish or something. But Calochortus, they all kind of look alike. They're patterning, except for the crazy ones, the Sandlos, Obis bensis and Tibrinensis. But in Monkeyflowers, they've kind of just like gone in a lot of different directions. And so here's the habitat just in granitic. It only comes up in really good rainfall years. Some years there's none. Another, it's very beautiful, very cute, and it's very restricted to the foothill region from Amador County down to Mariposa. And unfortunately, this is like vacation cabin central. It likes meadows and kind of the edge of little meadows, and it's lost a lot of habitat. These are all these grids here are from CNDDB, the Natural Diversity Database. It means that somewhere in that quad there is a population. So it's here, but it is a 1D, and it probably has a 2 or 3 threat ranking. Pulchellus means beautiful in Latin, so it's true to form. And a lot of times you see plants with 3 or 4 blooms on it, but here's one in El Nino year, and I'm signaling that El Nino year is a great time to go out and look for monkey flowers, and also after a burn. I don't think it was the rim fire. I think it was a station fire. Below that, so a lot of nutrients return to the ground, great rainfall. This is one plant that had like 120 flowers on it. And another cool thing in variability, look at this one. Here's one lobe, and then the other 4 are lavender or pink. And then look at this one here is 3 of them are yellow and 2 are pink. And so you don't want to run out and describe a new species the minute you see that, but there's always variability. One of my favorite, I do have favorite monkey flowers, and this is one of my favorite, and I saw this pretty early, and I chucked my slides on it when my friend Stephen Ingram, the president of the Bristlecone. It's like East Side, no, Bishop, no. Bristlecone chapter. Stephen's a professional photographer, amazing photographer, and I told him about this spot in Death Valley, northern Death Valley, in the mountain range that I'm working with people doing a floristic study, and it's the Rupicola, which means rock lover in Latin. And it's just the contrast of the harshness of the habitat it occurs in is so amazing. I mean, there's cacti and spiny shrubs. And then here's this little plant again that looks like somebody bought it at Ace Hardware and planted it out there, and it's growing. And these are perennials. Some years they just are existing. They're able to put the roots way down in the cracks of the limestone. Limestone holds water pretty well. And then in good years, last year was an amazing year. And that's one worth seeing. You can just see it off the side of the road if you know where to look. And let's see. So after I'd been interested in monkey flowers for a few years, a paper came out in Madronio, and I'd heard about this, that Jim Shivak was the Sequoia National Forest botanist for many, many years. And then more recently, he moved to San Francisco and worked for the Park Service, and then retired. And then he totally went to the dark side. He's just only interested in bryophytes now. He couldn't be bothered with vascular plants, but he did discover. Well, he discovered this. I think he saw it in out in the wild. But then when he went into the herbarium, he realized it had been collected before by Ernest Twisselman 40 years before. But Ernest Twisselman became a little bit confused, and naturally so, because Ernest was familiar with this plant Monkeyflowers, or back then it was called Barbados, that occurred at about 8,000 feet up in Domelands Wilderness. And it's only 12 air miles from where the Shivakiai is occurring. And so Ernest called these plants, Monkeyflowers, and they got stuck in herbarium sheets both at Cal Academy of Sciences and Jepson. And it took like 30 or 40 years for Jim Shivak to actually see the plants in the wild, go back and look, and realize that this is a brand new plant. And it's, again, totally unique in having it's bilabiate. It's got two lips, but the lower lip is just one corolla lobe, and the other four are up here. And then who knows? I mean, Jim, once I talked to him, and like nobody has any clue if this is a pure coincidence that these two color forms only occur 12 miles from each other. And they're not each other's closest sister species, but they're in the same group. But there's a story there of why they look so similar, or is it pure coincidence? And there's no way to get a lot of good data on that. But this is probably like one of the top 5 now for people who are got into botany through iNaturalist, want to go see cool things. There's also, how many people have heard of Matt Berger or Sheriff Woody, or Crime Page, but botany doesn't, that guy? I mean, there's just a whole slew of people who are, they got into botany through Instagram and TikTok and stuff, but then I think iNaturalist has like just pulled them in, and they're very arduous, compulsive people, and go out and photograph hundreds and hundreds of things, and they're collecting good data. It doesn't equate to a voucher specimen in most cases, but it's great observations. And so this Shivakiai occurs in Joshua tree, sort of stunted Joshua tree woodland in granitic soils, alluvial soils. And this is another one of the top really cool plants. And this and the next Monkeyflower I'm going to show probably had a mutation. Their ancestor was a two-lipped bilabiate structure, and they had some mutation that knocked out that patterning, and they went back to a more simple, rudimentary regular. They call this a regular or rotate corolla. And so there's only 2 Monkeyflowers that look like this. And I believe, just by virtue of one, I started calling it the black hole Monkeyflower, because it just reminded me of, like, if you look into it, it's like something that came from outer space and it's sitting there, and you just start looking into it and you get drawn into it and disappear. But some other people are calling that, but it looks like a mouth, and it's very, very cool. And it is really hard to find. There's not much of it left. Oh, here's the map right here. Right, like here, somewhere in here is Barstow, if you've ever been to Barstow. And there, believe it or not, development around there, and there's solar panels and off-road vehicles and utility lines with roads being put in there. And so this is definitely wouldn't be, it's very endangered, but it's also, you got to be there in a super good, or the right rainfall. One year of El Nino rains, the desert got tons of rain, and an area where I visited it before was just thick with 20 different kinds of annual wildflowers. And if there was Monkeyflower there, it just looked like it was getting crowded out. But a really cool ephemeral plant. That's its habitat in sort of cobbly areas. And it's for many years, like maybe 80 years, this plant was lumped into the same subgenus as Mohavensis. And people are just like, well, duh, they're the only Monkeyflowers that have this rotate corolla and nothing's like them, so they'll be put in their own group. But one of the first DNA analyses showed that they're very separate from each other. And this Pictus is nothing's closely related to it. It's kind of in a group of its own. It probably got this mutation independent of the mojavensis, which is more closely related to a lot of the purple monkeyflowers. And Pictus is also very restricted to the foothills of Kern and Tulare County. And I no way of knowing this, but I think this photographs of the species are more consistently included in CNPS publications, in newsletters of the local chapter, in people's avatars, because a lot of like Google accounts and social media, you get a round thing to put your avatar in, and I've seen like somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen people. And there's just something, this is called the calico monkeyflower. And it's pretty cool. And I think, and there's a whole story about it. It's in a very specialized habitat next to these granitic boulders, and there's a ribes that occurs here, and then the oaks. And this area is almost always barren. And there's talking about, is the ribes allelopathic, and is that keeping that patch open? Or are there rabbits hiding in the shrubs? And they don't want to eat the monkeyflower, but they eat everything else. And I don't know if Nick has an opinion on that. He did his PhD thesis in the Cajon Ranch area, where there's some great populations of this, but it's cool. And so I've now come to our last species of the night, and it's just another one of these cool, very restricted. It occurs within this boundary, but only in one tiny part of it on the Cahuilla River drainage in Kings Sequoia National Park, and it only occurs on marble outcroppings. And so there's a limited amounts of calcareous rocks, mainly limestone, in the state. There's actually, if you hang around with botanists, look at publications and everything, you'd think that the only cool rock association in the state is serpentine. And it is amazing. It's the top one. There's 450 plants that are primarily or exclusively found on serpentine. But I've got a little side project, and there's 230 plants that seem to be only found or mainly found on carbonates, limestone, gypsum, dolomite, and marble. And this plant is only about 10 populations on marble outcroppings in the lower 1,500-foot elevation. There's yucca and rattlesnakes and chamois and stuff around there. And it's a really cool plant too. But one thing is it has a behavior, and this will be my last story and ending the talk, is that when it's blooming, it's on the edge of these outcrops right here, and the flowers stick straight out. And then later the flower drops off, and then that pedicel, the stem that the calyx is on, slowly bends backwards, and pretty much usually it will bend backwards till it touches the marble. And there's some other related species that we're now discovering are doing the same things, that grow on cliffs. And two-bit hypothesis is that it doesn't want to drop its seeds down into, off the cliff face and down into just the open dirt. It's probably trying to place them back where they're likely. So when you're a botany student, when you're an entomology student, there's a whole class in insect behavior. And there's usually one or two professors that's their thing, insect behavior. They have tons of grad students. I've yet to see in a botany department that offers a class in plant behavior. But I think there's a lot of different things that plants do that could be considered behaviors. And with that, I'm done.